Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to this webinar on the role of civil society in ensuring the right to a basic education. We're so glad that you've been able to join us, and we're looking forward to this hour. The hour that we've got together is going to be an opportunity to learn, to think differently, to understand the work that we are doing together and that we all have a commitment to. But we're also hoping that it's going to be an opportunity to learn and understand the challenges we face differently. So we're going to make sure that you have an opportunity to interact in two ways. If you've used this webinar jam before, you may already be familiar with the screen. But on this screen, you'll find a chat function. So if you look on your screen and you click on the chat function, you should be able to ask questions. Now, unfortunately, we won't be able to see you. We won't be able to hear you laugh at all the jokes that people are going to tell. We're going to be entirely dependent on what you write in the chat. So any comments that you want to make, any questions that you want to ask, you need to write in the chat, and myself and Nsiki will be monitoring that to make sure that your questions are put to the speakers. Now, I should start by introducing myself. My name is Mary Metcalfe. I'm a long-time supporter and collaborator with both Section 27 and Equal Education Law Centre. I'm a teacher, passionate about education, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity of being the person who moderates this conversation. Now, before I introduce the speakers, I want to just ask you to do two things. Make sure you can find the chat function so that you can talk to us, and that talking will be in the notes that you write. And I also want to say that we have a poll. We've got two polls, I think. And the first poll is a very interesting question that you may already have a firm view about, or you may not. But we want you to find the poll function in the box on the right. It says polls. Click on the poll, complete the poll. And I'm going to be curious to see if you're open to changing your mind, and if you do change your mind in the course of the afternoon discussion. Now, our first speaker was going to be Alanda Magoo, who is an equalizer working within equal education. And I'm so disappointed that she's got problems with connection, and we are not going to be able to have her join us, which is such a pity, because I know that many of you have joined because you particularly wanted to hear Yolanda. So I hope that the equalizers that are present are going to be helping us with the views of the equalizers in the absence of Tracey. So I need now to just introduce our speakers. Faranaaz, I think everyone can see. Faranaaz, I think you need to just wave so people who don't know you can identify you. So Faranaaz has got, she's got a BA from WITS and a master's degree. She's got a doctorate in human rights and constitutional practice. And her doctoral research is really relevant to today because she explored the influence of social movements in relation to the legislature, the executive, and the courts. She's worked as a lawyer at the South African Human Rights Commission. She's practiced. She joined the Center for Applied Legal Studies at WITS, and now she's been working at Section 27. She's published and written extensively. Nurina and Faranaaz are going to be working together to make a presentation. And Nurina is a passionate lawyer. She's passionate about using legal advocacy to advance the goal of achieving education, equal education for all. She did a BA at WITS, she did a master's at the University of Edinburgh. She completed her articles. She practiced in public law at a firm of attorneys, and she's also was a person who practiced as a law clerk to Edwin Cameron at the Constitutional Court. Now, the first person who's going to actually speak is Tracey Malawana from Tembisa, a social justice activist. She's the Deputy General Secretary at Equal Education, and that, as we know, is a youth-led social movement that advocates for quality and equality in South Africa. She believes that government has a responsibility to invest in the education of all of its children. She's been and is still an Atlantic Senior Fellow for Health Equity, been awarded with the title of 2018 Emerging Leaders in Public Health. She's co-founder of Healthy Living Alliance. She's worked on the tax on sugary drinks. She's doing what she can to reduce the non-communicable diseases in the country. And she believes that the Bank of Justice is never bankrupt. So we are going to invite Tracey to begin. And Tracey, I might ask you to also answer some of the questions that Yolanda was going to address. But if you could start off by just telling us, what has Equal Education been doing during this time of COVID? What is the kind of mobilization that you've been leading? What are the strategies? What are the issues that are emerging? Over to you, Tracey.
Thank you so much, Mary, and hello to the viewers at home. So I think I should start off by speaking about how equal education is organized and some of the tactics that we use to raise awareness around the issues that South Africa is faced with when it comes to the education sector. So equal education is advocating for quality and equality in the South African education system, as you have explained in my bio. And some of the tactics that we normally use, we use research and activism to raise awareness, also try to put some of the issues that we are faced with in like a spotlight so that government can address those issues. So how we organize young people, either in schools or in communities, because we have school-going members who we refer to as equalizers. Then we have, some of the teachers are supporting equal education. Then we have members who are, parents, either of those equalizers that we have, or of other children within different schools that we have in South Africa. So that's what equal education is. So how we mobilize and how we organize, our primary tactic of organizing and mobilizing is we mobilize young people who are like school-going, post-school youth, and we organize them either by, convening youth groups on weekly basis, or by convening leadership trainings, as in like we have the leadership committee, a group of young people or a group of learners who we refer to as equalizers who are leading in their different schools. So those are some of the tactics that we use. We convene in like youth group spaces to share some of the issues that we are faced with, but at the same time to try and find solutions. We use, we campaign around those issues, maybe either using a school-based campaign or provincial campaigns around infrastructure, teaching and learning issues. Then we also have like a national campaign, which is the well-known campaign, it's Minimum Norms and Standards for School Infrastructure, which is infrastructure campaign advocating for uniform infrastructure in different schools, public schools in South Africa. So those are some of the ways that we've been organizing, influencing, democratic decision making, either in like parliament or in other spaces where decisions are made. We've been engaging government on like face-to-face or online campaigning, either via social media, Twitter, Facebook, or in like in-person meetings or public events. We've been doing like protests And we also, like, as a last resort, we litigate, and most of the time we are represented by the Equal Education Law Center. So that is how Equal Education has been doing its work. But because of the pandemic, we then had to think about how do we then adjust how we do things since we can't meet in person. So it means we need now to shift to how we, do our secondary organizing. So Equal Education has platforms like WhatsApp or Facebook, private Facebook pages, where our equalizers, post-youth parents are able to have conversations and also build campaigns around some of the challenges that learners are faced with in schools. And that's I think the way that we are organizing during this period of time. So now we've shifted from our primary organizing, which is in-person meetings, in-person workshops, to like online workshops. And even I think by using that tactic, which is something that we use to support some of the work that we do, to support our primary tactics, I think the challenges there that we've been facing is that some of our members who are based in deep rural, areas across the country are unable to access those platforms because they don't have right devices. So we also need to think about how do we accommodate our members who are able to engage in those conversations. So we've been, calling some of the equalizers to give them an update, ask them questions, and we've been also sending bulk SMSs to our members able to engage in these processes. And that's how we've been monitoring some like the school readiness and reopening of schools using that tactic, calling, WhatsApp groups, Facebook, and so forth. But it has been difficult because it's difficult to reach everyone using technology. And I think it's something that we're also trying to adjust and to also get comfortable with using, because it's not our primary way of organizing. Something.
Thank you, Tracey. There's so much that's really rich in what you're saying. It was useful to get an understanding of the work that EE's historically been in, but I've also found it very interesting to understand how the current COVID space impacts even on how you reach your members, that there's unequal access to the devices and the Wi-Fi that impacts on organizing. Maybe if you could share with us a little bit of how the epidemic is impacting on the learners themselves. I know that we don't have Yolanda with us, but in terms of the school life of equalizers, what are they experiencing?
Okay, so thanks so much for that question. So according to the survey that we conducted during the level 5 lockdown in March, April, some of the things that came out from that, some of the findings that came out from that survey is that equalizers who are benefiting from the school nutrition program were unable to access the school nutrition program while the schools were in lockdown. Even now, those that are still are still like in lockdown, having phased in back to school, those are not grade 7s and grade 12s. It means that they can't access the school nutrition program because it's not provided for them. And I think when we conducted our survey, one of the things that came out strongly was that some households were now expected to choose between buying data or buying bread to ensure that children within that particular household are able to eat. And at the same time, as a parent, you're also worried that your child will be left behind because there's also an expectation for them to learn while they are at home. So that is, I think, the big key thing that came out from that survey that we conducted during level 5 lockdown. Then the second thing was the issue of homeschooling, because how we understand homeschooling, I think for people who are studying via UNISA, you also understand how homeschooling or long distance learning works. So you need a right device to be able to access learning platforms. But at the same time, you need strong connectivity, you need data or Wi-Fi. You need worksheets in like hard copy so that if the system is not working or you don't have data, at least you still have an alternative plan to be able to learn. You need a textbook, and we know that in some schools, learners do not have textbooks because they share textbooks. But now there's an expectation for you to learn without a textbook. So those are some of the things that equalizers have highlighted, that it's quite difficult for them to access the learning platforms because they don't have the right devices. We have members who do not have access to TV and radio, but there's an expectation for them to learn while they are at home. So those are some of the things that came out. But the key thing is also like a conducive space to learn, because when you're learning from home, you also need to be supported. I think for people like myself who are studying through UNISA, our families are able to support us to learn when we are at home. But if you are a learner and there's no supporting structure at home, then it's quite difficult for you to be able to concentrate in your schoolwork. But at the same time, there's a support that is required, which is a support that you need from a teacher to know whether you're doing the right thing. The support that you need from your parents, which we know most of our members' parents are like from the black and working class communities, and most of them are working long hours, meaning that it's quite difficult for them to even be able to support their learners in ways that other learners are supported in other areas across South Africa. So those are some of the issues that came out. For girl learners, there's an issue around access to dignity packs or sanitary towels. When we are at home and you used to get dignity packs at school, then now it means you can't access that because schools are closed. So those are some of the things that came out from that, the survey that we conducted to get a sense of what challenges are learners facing while they're at home. And most of them said that they think it's better to be at school because those things are provided. And for girl learners, they are able to focus on their school work instead of like doing chores and looking after their younger siblings. So those were some of the key things that were highlighted by the findings of that particular survey.
I want to thank Tracey for that really insightful comments that she's made about the challenges of not being at school, advantages of being at school. And I want to thank her for her insights about the challenge of learning at home. Before I let you go, Trace, I want to ask you, and I think it's a difficult question. It's one I'm struggling with all the time. And that is, as activists who are trying to improve both the right to education, the quality of education, what do you think are the broader lessons that will help us transform education post-COVID? I think that's a challenge. Let's see what you need to say. And then can I ask all of the participants to write in the chat comments the things that you would like to hear Tracey respond to?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think it's the question that every young activist or every activist in different spaces are grappling with, because I'm sure that this is not the first and the only time we'll have a pandemic. So we also need to think about how we're going to react in future when we find ourselves in the situation that we are in the middle of a pandemic. I think the key things that I've learned during this moment, one is that it's very important for government to act with sense of agency and to always have a political will, plan properly, budget accordingly to ensure that they are able to execute, execute the work that they are expected to execute. So I'm thinking about norms and standards, minimum norms and standards for school infrastructure. a law that states what a school should look like or what makes a school to be a school. Some of the challenges that we are faced with in 2020 are some of the, things that were supposed to be resolved by 2016. The provision of water in all schools that do not have access to water, the eradication of peat latrines in schools that have, peat latrines. So access to electricity or energy. Those are some of the things that the department was supposed to, deal with long time ago. But we find ourselves in 2020 worried about those basic needs in those particular schools. So I think there's a lesson to be learned here that we need to always do things according to how we've planned to do them, according to the law, so that when we find ourselves in situations like this, we don't need to worry about things because we've dealt with. We just worry about how do we move forward, how do we, assist learners and teachers to be able to learn. I think we've spoken about introduction of IR4. And I think in moments like these, there are a lot of issues that we've seen around, online learning. So I think there's also a lesson to be learned there. How do we introduce, ICT in schools? What is it that is required for ICT to work in those schools? And what about people who do not have access to, the strong connectivity? Rural areas, how are we going to ensure that they are well supported? The issue of collaboration. How do you collaborate with civil society? How do you collaborate with schools to ensure that we are able to work towards the same goal, all of us within the education? And how do you consult young people, especially learners and teachers, to be able to have a voice in decision making? Then lastly, what is the role of parents? So I think the past 2 months, we've seen homes being turned to classrooms. We've seen young people being supported by their parents instead of teachers most of the time. So there's a role, I think there's a lesson to learn there. We need to somehow assist parents to be able to support and to be involved within the education system. So what is the role that a school can play to ensure that a parent is able to fully support their learners when they are at home? And noting some of the parents from the working class communities are required to work long hours, and sometimes they get home very tired. It's quite difficult for them to offer that kind of support. But what is it that we can do within the education system as activists, but also as school and government, to ensure that parents are able to play the role that they are supposed to play? Because now parents are somehow the teachers of their children while they're at home. So what is it that we can do to ensure that teaching and learning is able to, that there's a link between homes and, schools. Yeah. I think I'll stop there. I think those are some of the key things that we need to think about. And I think those are some of the key things that we need to explore together and see how we can ensure that it works, and both teachers, learners, and parents are able to access psychosocial support in that process. Yeah.
Tracey, that was fantastic. I think that there were so many very rich points there that I would like to discuss more. I again appeal to all of the people that are part of this webinar to add the questions that you want Tracey to develop further when we come back for that discussion in your questions. I'm looking at the poll and I can see that it's quite close. In terms of the question of do you think schools should have stayed closed for the duration of the pandemic? Just over 50% are saying no, but close to 50% are saying yes. So this might be something that you also want to focus on as you direct your questions. But the next two speakers, which come as partners in a presentation, are firstly, we're going to have Nurina Ally from Equal Education Law Centre, and she's going to talk about what has been done in terms of the work of Equal Education Law Centre, and I think Section 27 as a legal approach to education under COVID. And she's going to be followed by Faranaaz Veriava, who's going to talk about what they've learnt as both EELC and Section 27. So you've each got about 7 minutes so that we've got time for questions. Thank you. I think, Nurina, over to you.
Thanks, Mary. And thanks, Tracey. And it's really great to have this platform, and thank you to everyone who's joined the conversation. I'll just start off by saying that it hasn't been easy. And there's been a lot of need to constantly reflect on what we're doing, what the situation is at the moment, how government is responding, what learners and parents are asking for, and what our role should be in relation to that. And it's been evolving over time. And when the pandemic hit South Africa, schools were the first institutions to close. And that was dramatic. And like everyone, we were in a wait and see approach. We understood the necessity for this extreme limitation on the right to basic education and the related rights of children. We understood that that was something that needed to happen at the time. And we were willing to give a lot of space and generosity to the government, who has had a very unenviable task of needing to manage a crisis of this proportion. And to see what came out of government's plans and how we could provide as much constructive support and input as we could. And in the beginning stages of the pandemic, where we focused our attention was trying to draw government's attention, and particularly the Department of Basic Education's attention, to areas that we thought needed more development. But our aim was to really try and put on the table ideas that could possibly be taken up. And we also really wanted to focus on trying to get as much transparency as possible, so that the public could be brought into the government's confidence on what plans were being put in place and what the current thinking was around children and education. And so in the initial stages, Equal Education Law Centre and Section 27 came together to say, okay, let's put our heads together. We're all thinking about the same issues. We all know that there's these problems. How do we think we can collectively contribute to the proposals and the developments that are being put on the table? And some of the key issues that emerged was, first of all, the type of resources and support that was being provided to children at home for learning and teaching. We knew that schools were going to be closed for a significant period, but an indefinite period of time. And the interim measures that were being put in place by the department were admirable under the urgent circumstances, but we also know are not entirely adequate. And so the three organizations crafted correspondence with the department and also worked on ideas to try and improve the reach of teaching and learning support to learners, and tried to emphasize that whilst online learning was significant and was a resource that needed to be used at this time, there was also a need to think about the learners who don't have access to online resources. And what was quite significant in that process was the call to make sure that there was one consolidated resource, a one-stop shop that parents and learners could go to, where they could get a list of all the resources that were available, because in the experience of the organizations, it was quite disparate, and there was some information on one website, some on the provincial education website, but not all in one place. And it's been very encouraging to see that over time, although we haven't seen a direct acknowledgement that it's come out of some of our suggestions, over time there has been an effort to try and consolidate the resources, to let people know everything is available. and also to make sure that the zero-rated websites that are now available are properly listed for learners and for parents. As Tracey mentioned, there's still significant work that needs to be done in this area. That while schools remain closed, while kids are phased back in, there's an expectation that children will learn at home. The department has itself said that provincial education departments must try and make arrangements for children to be able to access teaching and learning at home. But whether that's actually effective and how to improve that is something that's an ongoing process, and we're engaging on that. A second big issue that emerged for us was around the National School Nutrition Program. And quite early on, we, together with other children's rights organizations, including Children's Institute and Center for Child Law, started advocating for the continuation of the National School Nutrition Program in one form or another. There's a lot of recognition that, of course, given the circumstances, you can't roll out the program as one usually would. But we did a lot of research on what was happening in other countries, and there were very creative ways in which this was being done to make sure that children continue to access nutrition in some form. And we early on started advocating for that. And this has really been a lesson in persistence because we've had to collectively continue to advocate for the continuation of the program. We eventually got some agreements from the department, an indication that all children would be accessing food once schools open for grade 7s and 12s. This commitment has subsequently been broken. And now we've moved into a phase where we've had to litigate. We in fact launched an application on Friday to try and ensure that all children are able to receive the school meals every day, or at least the qualifying learners would be able to receive those meals. And so this has also demonstrated to us that constructive engagement and generosity and patience is really important. But at some point, we've also had to be quite clear that we have specific demands. Learners need certain services to be provided to them. And if necessary, we have to escalate and use other forms of or other avenues and tools to be able to get those demands met. Very quickly, some of the other issues that we've also had to follow up on is on the budget transparency in this time. There's been murmurs of significant reallocations of aspects of the education budget, including the education infrastructure grant, which is quite significant in this period of time. And we've sought to gain more information from the Department of Basic Education as well as from National Treasury on what exactly is happening with the budgetary allocations. And we can't lose sight of this because it's going to have significant long-term implications for the education system. We're currently awaiting a more substantial response. At the moment, we haven't gotten the details that we're looking for, but it's an area that we're following up on. I see Mary's come on, so I'm guessing that's a sign that I must quickly move on, which I will. I just want to touch on very quickly three other aspects, but very quickly. The one vexing issue was around school readiness and what position should be adopted in relation to the reopening of schools. One of the angles that we focused on was making sure that plans were publicly available, making sure that everybody understood the science informing the decisions that were being taken and what actually was being put in place. It took a very long time, but it has been good that the department has now at least started to put some information on the website. And it's been very helpful to informing us on what we can expect as schools have reopened. Important also in that process is making sure that there's some clear regulatory framework. And the department finally issued directions to inform what must happen as schools reopen. And when those directions first came out, we were very concerned. And we wrote quite a significant letter to the department indicating our concerns. And very encouragingly, we've seen that the department has come back to civil society and asked for meaningful engagement. And they actually offered us an opportunity to make direct recommendations on what amended directions should look like. And we're now waiting to see if those recommendations are taken up. Very, very last point is learners with disabilities has been an issue that hasn't received the attention we think it deserves. And this is another area where collaboration between various civil society organizations has been significant, with organizations of persons with disabilities, Section 27, Center for Child Law, Equal Education Law Center, all engaging with the department, trying to make sure that this issue is on the agenda. So there's a lot there, but those are the kind of range of issues that we've been working on.
For now, we really thank Nurina for those 5 key areas where you've done important work: inequity and learning at home, urgency of National School Nutrition Program, proceeding to litigation, the issue of budget transparency, the issue of how school readiness has been managed, and of course the issue of learners with disabilities. So, Faranaaz, what have we learned?
Thank you very much, Mary. And you can't punish me with the clock going, just warning you. But I'll try and go through all my comments as fast as I can. To just say why we are here today, first and foremost, to commemorate June the 16th, a very profound moment in the history of South Africa. And I also want to say it's not a surprise that I'm sitting here today. My own family was conscientized during the June the 16th uprising. They all became activists following the June the 16th uprising. I won't say how old I was then, but I was a little girl. And I think it had a very profound formative impact on me, which is why I became a human rights lawyer and probably why I became an education rights lawyer in the first place. So I'm going to touch on a few things that based on what Nurina had spoken about. As you know, we've looked a lot at remote learning, we've looked a lot at school readiness, and we have now instituted a case around the school nutrition program. So I will just focus my analysis on what I've learned from those 3 areas. The first thing I want to say is something that we've all heard repeatedly, but it is very profound and very, it makes the point in relation to the right to basic education. So the right to a lot of our work was about balancing the right to basic education against the health and safety of learners. But what we found is that when it came to the right to education, the pandemic perpetuated existing inequalities in education, like in so many areas of the pandemic. So, for example, on the issue of remote learning, we've heard from both Nurina and Tracey how some learners are better able to access remote learning than others. And when I look at the example of my own children, the schools that they attend could go to remote learning immediately. They both have access to devices. They both have access to data. And we know from the minister that at least 70% of children in schools across the country have had challenges in this regard. And then now that we go to school readiness, we see that there are similar challenges affecting, again, the poorest learners. So, for example, we know that sanitation infrastructure has been one of the biggest challenges, getting where there are pit toilets, getting portable toilets to schools, getting water tanks to school, and all those issues have been issues that are affecting the poorest learners. My kids have little embroidered masks with their school emblems, whereas many schools are waiting for their masks. So that again is just another example. Nurina has touched a lot on the issue of collaboration between all our civil society organizations. And I must say it has been a very dynamic collaboration, not just with Equal Education and Equal Education Law Center, but more broadly with legal organizations and children's rights organizations. And we have worked very well historically over the last 5 years We developed an education handbook together. We've supported each other's cases, either as amicus curiae or as institutional applicants. But by far, we have shown in this that we are stronger together. And I think the reason why we have particularly worked well together is because all three organizations come out of a similar tradition of activist lawyering, and we use the same strategies and tactics. So around the school nutrition case, we knew when we had exhausted advocacy, we would move on to a case. We built a case based on legal argument, based on expert evidence. So, for example, we have evidence that even though there were food parcels and the child support grant, it didn't replace the school nutrition program. And children are more hungry now than they were before the lockdown. Nurina also mentioned things like the one-stop shop. Education is a very big part of what we do. We've developed a resource map, bringing together all the resources for online learning. We've put together a package of all the laws around school readiness. And Tracey spoke about their workshops going from in-person workshops with equalizers to now being online. So I'm sure all the NSMP education workshops will be online workshops to the equalizers. Then I want to make my last and very short point, which is something that many organizations have been thinking about. And that is, how do we mobilize during this time for more sustainable change? How do we leverage this moment? And for us in the education sector, we have noticed that the government was able to project manage taking water tanks to schools and to communities all over this country with military precision and with using the SANDF. How do we do that in a way that changes water tanks and delivery of water in the short term to long-term water connections? How do we make sure that portable toilets become a long-term, support our program for building sanitation and toilets in the long term? And that is a question I think I'd like to throw out more to our people here, because for me, what I've learned from this is that where there's a will, there's a way, and suddenly we've seen a political will. How do we translate this political will during the pandemic to a more long-term political or a long-term transformation? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faranaaz. I'm asking all of the panelists to now come put their videos on so that we can see you all. I've heard from Nsiki that apparently I'm not very audible. So I'm asking Tracey and Nurina and Faranaaz to just raise your hand if you can hear me. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Now, we've all set aside until 4 o'clock. I'm not sure if we'll be able to go over 4 o'clock, but can we now start taking some of the questions that have been asked in the chat group? Now, the first question that I want to go to, and it might be quite a quick one, Nurina, but I want to ask you, in your view, why do you think the National School Nutrition Program hasn't yet been reintroduced? Why is it that the department hasn't undertaken or proceeded on the undertaking that they gave you?
Well, that's the problem. We don't know. It seems to us that there's no good reason for not rolling out the school nutrition program to all learners at this stage, particularly when the department itself committed to doing that at least by the end of April and then more definitively in mid-May. We haven't received a coherent response from the department on that. So it's a question outstanding. We're waiting to understand that better. We think there is no good reason at this stage. I certainly think that in the initial stages, of the pandemic, there was a recognition of the need to institute specific measures to ensure safety for learners. But I think that there's been enough time to learn how that can be done. There's now standard operating procedures in place for the rollout of school nutrition programs at schools. And we think that this can be done. It can be done safely. There's no reason why it shouldn't be.
Thank you very much. Tracey, there was a question in the chat group about if there's psychosocial support offered to learners and what are the problems with this. And I wondered if you wanted to link that question to your sense of how learners are feeling as they go back to school.
I believe that there's been a reference around provision of mental or psychosocial support to learners and teachers in schools, but it hasn't been like quite clear how are they going to go about providing that service. Are we going to have someone who's maybe allocated to that specific to ensure that they are able to access, learners are able to access that service immediately when they need it. So I think that there hasn't been like clear plan on how that service is going to be provided. But I'm aware that there are like people like crisis for care, a number of social work network, about over 100 social workers network that is providing that service for teenagers and also for like anyone who needs such a particular service during this period of time. And I think people can look at their website or their Twitter page. But I don't think it has been like clear from our members, and they haven't like received such service. But most of them have communicated how anxious and the anxiety that has caused to them and to their families. So I think even when we're thinking about mental health or psychosocial support, we also need to think about how we're going to support those families who, some of the parents, we have like given their testimonies saying that I had to like choose I now buy data or I buy bread in my household. And I don't think it's an easy choice to make, because you want your child to, keep up with schoolwork, but at the same time, you also want to ensure that it's able to eat within your household. So I think when we're thinking about psychosocial support, we need to think about it for learners, teachers, and also think about how we're going to support parents who have suffered lots of anxiety during this period of time, trying to support their learners to learn.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's so many systemic problems that we're understanding more deeply because of COVID, and psychosocial support for learners is one of those. And what you're saying is that we're still not very clear what's being offered in schools. Now, one of the next questions that has come up in the chat group that I think is very important, and I'm going to link two questions here. One is, this is an opportunity for meaningful 21st century change for education. Do you have much hope, Faranaaz, that in terms of shifting to a 21st century notion, not only of modalities, but also of purposes of learning, are we going to be able to make that shift? And that links, I think, to another comment about reviewing the curriculum, technical subjects, entrepreneurship training, upgrading school networks in rural areas, greater a benefit to the community of those networks. So is this a transformation moment? Are you hopeful? Oh, Mike?
Nurina will tell you I always do this. I always forget the mic is off. I think you gave me the very difficult question here. We don't have a choice but to have hope, because if we don't have hope, then what are we doing here? my experience from working in education is that we focus on small victories and we work to bigger moments. What the pandemic has showed us, it sure has showed us that there are new ways of learning, that people adapt quickly to new ways of learning. Um, I struggled to be on Zoom, for example, at the beginning. I've watched my kids start taking virtual learning as second nature. My oldest son doesn't think he ever wants to go back to school ever again, and he thinks he's more productive here, and he learns better online. So within my kind of limited micro understanding of pedagogy, I think it is possible for us to look at new ways of learning. Obviously, whether it comes to resourcing schools from a technological perspective or resourcing schools from an infrastructure perspective, the biggest issue remains inequality. And unless we address inequality across these various spectrums, when it comes to curriculum, upgrading teacher knowledge in the most disadvantaged schools, to be able to adapt to new curricula, ensuring that there is enough what we call sanitation infrastructure, making sure that people are technologically skilled, and that have devices, and that people are able to access data in their homes and at school. Those would be all the important things. But I think what we've learned is that there are possibilities, but what we need to ensure that there is a sustained will going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Faranaaz. Now, I'm going to ask a question that came earlier on from Alice Brown. And I think I'm going to let any one of you respond, and more than one of you might want to respond. But Alice has asked, what is your sense of post-COVID? What are our chances in terms of the push for norms and standards in terms of infrastructure to make progress on that? And what do you think will be the issues around accountability? So, Tracey, you thinking hard? Who would like to take that one as a first stab? Nurina?
Yeah, I mean, I can come in on, some tentative thoughts. I think that we are seeing a hurried push to quickly plaster over what are systemic inequalities and systemic problems. I think to the extent that there has been some emergency provisioning of sanitation in schools, that is positive. We shouldn't disregard that. But it's currently unclear what the possibilities are for the department, and not just the Department of Basic Education, but for the related departments, to keep that going, to make sure that there's effective rollout post-COVID, there's effective management of maintenance, and there's a proper attention to all of the issues that eco-education and others have been raising for over a decade now. The mere fact that the Director General said in a portfolio committee meeting that the education infrastructure grant would be almost entirely reprioritized as a result of COVID is already a big warning sign to us, that there isn't necessarily long-term thinking here. And so this is exactly why the work of eco-education, Section 27, and all the other organizations, and small community-based, school-based monitoring, parent groups, learner groups, who are keeping an eye on what's going on in their schools is so important, because when the attention or the kind of immediate pressure emerging from COVID is turned away, we need to make sure that those issues are being consistently paid attention to. So, I mean, in summary, I think that we're seeing some positive responsiveness, but I am cautious about how long-term and systemic that's going to be. Mary, if could I touch on one other question now, or should I wait?
No, definitely go for it.
There was a question that was raised by Katima on the consistency applied in respect of the closing of schools when there are confirmed COVID cases. And Katima noted that it's positive that the department seems to be taking feedback into their guidelines and protocols. But what about this inconsistency? And there was a Jay Kinnear who also mentioned, why isn't the DBE part of this conversation? Surely it's better to engage them on their plans and to just talk about their plans. My experience has been that the department is increasingly open to getting feedback and to engage on what is missing in their plans. You need to be able to know who to reach in the department, which ear to actually find, it seems, is quite significant. But the more that people raise these issues, if you raise it also through our various law clinics and organizations, we can also take up those issues. On the very specific point of consistency on the closure of schools, we've also noted that that's an issue. The standard operating procedures provides for a very clear process that should be followed, one that engages the health experts on whether a school should be closed. And we're trying to get the department to make sure that they're constantly reevaluating their processes together with the Department of Health, so that and to communicate that as effectively as possible.
Thank you very much, Nurina. The question of the participation of the department from Jenny Kinnear, I want to actually make a suggestion that you comment on the chat. I think we should, as participants in this webinar, ask Section 27 if they would invite the DBE to come into a webinar in the future to be able to engage the questions. So tell me on the chat if you think that that's a good idea. Now, the next question that I want to go to is the question that was asked by somebody in the chat, which I think is really interesting. And Tracey, this one's for you. The question was, noting that some learners prefer to work in a group and prefer, in the light of the shortages with access to information technology, that they might be able to work as a group in a school hall, etc. What do you think about the possibilities of self-initiated learner activities outside of the school situation?
Thanks so much for that question. I think it's something that came out from a number of panel discussions that we had via Facebook Live. I think one of the key things that came out there was how do we think about alternative ways of learning? How do we create other spaces for young people to learn and to be able to, feel supported? And I think one of the post-school youth members of Equal Education is a teacher, and he was saying that he was able to put together a WhatsApp group for a number of students to be able to learn in one space and like support each other in terms of doing that work. But at the same time, you also want to think about maybe possibilities of creating other spaces that will be safe for young people to convene and learn and support each other, because we know that, learners don't learn the same way. Some, they want to see things, some they want to be taught, some they're able to like teach themselves or to just like follow instructions. So I think those are some of the things that that came out from a number of conversations that we had. And I think those are some of the things that the department and also schools need to explore. How do you support learners who learn in like different ways in terms of like maybe in like group discussions instead of being taught by a teacher. So I believe that there's also an opportunity to think about those ways and also use technology, especially for some of the schools that they have given maybe learners tablets. How do you then use those tablets to ensure that there's also support amongst learners to support each other, support coming from a teacher. Then I wanted to touch base on the question that you asked around the issue of infrastructure post-COVID or other issues within the education system. I think that this moment presents us with an opportunity to reimagine. But I also think that the Department of Basic Education or government in general, different departments in government also need to think about how are they going to support that activity of reimagining. So if people tomorrow can look at our website, they'll see what equalizers want to see post-COVID, the education system that they want to see post-COVID. I think there is a possibility to see some changes, but that will require political will, proper planning, and that will require, allocations of funds and ensuring that the state capacity to deliver in some of the things that they've promised to deliver. That will require the minister coming out and saying that I've missed a number of deadlines. This is my new plan. This is how I'm going to make sure that I meet, those given deadlines within the norms and standards for school infrastructure moving forward. And I think also we've seen the minister coming out to speak to us as South Africans, even though maybe it's not like accommodating everyone, because not everyone has access to these to televisions and radios. But we've also seen MECs coming out to speak to us. And I was thinking to myself, how about they come every year on the 29th of November to give us an update on some of the that they were able to achieve within norms and standards for school infrastructure and create mechanisms for them to be held accountable if they didn't do anything. So I think this moment also like presents a number of opportunities for us to think about the issue of overcrowding in classes, the issue of post-provision in South Africa. We can't go back to that situation post-COVID. If we're going to have 20 learners in a classroom, then we need to think about how we're going to make sure that post-COVID, we are able to keep those classes small and we are able to have enough teachers teaching in that particular grade. Then the issue of psychosocial support is also not new. It's something that is supposed to be there in schools. It's something that our members in the Western Cape have been speaking about when they speak about issues of school safety. So the department needs to look at that deliberately and make sure that it does work. So I think this moment presents an opportunity for us to think about what is it that can work, how are we going to ensure that it works post-COVID-19, and trying to, implement some of those things during this period of time where everyone is open to learning and making mistakes. But we can't afford that post-COVID-19. Like, we can't.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracey. I think that everybody is hopefully listening and also looking at the chats, because one of the consensus points that's emerging is that COVID is making us even more deeply aware of the structural problems in education, the structural inequalities, and is requiring that we step up with new solutions. There's a very useful comment by Wayne who's saying we can have national school nutrition program in place in schools, but actually nutrition over weekends and holidays and in the community is also a challenge. So this is an invitation to all of us to rethink, to reimagine, to find solutions going forward. Now, I think we booked you until 4 o'clock, but for those of you who are willing to stay a little bit longer, I want to ask Faranaaz, then Nurina, and then Tracey, if you've got anything else that you'd like to say before I wrap up and close. Faranaaz?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to tell a little story about long-term solutions. And that is, last week and in the last 2 weeks, we've had many schools coming to us with their concerns around school safety, saying they haven't got masks, saying they haven't got water, saying they haven't got toilets. And eventually, one of the schools had water delivered to the school, or water tanks delivered to the school. That school has now come back to us and said, when COVID is finished and they're not supplying water, all the department has to do is connect the water tank to a reservoir connection that's about 300 meters outside of the school. Now, that is a long-term solution to make sure that there's always a water supply for the school that has historically not had water. So what I'm saying is, where there's possibilities for localized solutions, working with districts, and working with the department. Again, it comes back to what we've been saying: if there's a will, there's a way. But it is possible that some of what has happened around COVID can present more long-term solutions for many of these schools.
Thank you. Nurina.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's two reflections I'd like to end off with. The first is in response to Julia's question on the chat group about how do we develop sustainable and effective relationships with the department and the provincial education departments, because it seems like sometimes they just use us as engagements for window dressing. And my reflection on that is, I think that persistence is really key. Sometimes it can feel like our engagements and our statements and all of the various tactics that we use is just falling on deaf ears and maybe going into a vacuum. But it really does make a difference. And even if you only see the changes after some time, I think that we have to be able to see that it's because we've raised those issues, because we've made a noise about it. Had we not, it would have remained invisible. And in this period of time, I think that we're increasingly seeing the national and provincial departments looking to us also for answers and for input and for recommendations. I also think that it's about using multiple platforms. So we've been engaging the legislature alongside engaging the departments. We've used engaged National Treasury alongside the Department of Basic Education, Department of Social Development where necessary alongside the Department of Basic Education. And having that very holistic and multi-pronged approach, I think, is really important. The second reflection, which is connected to that, is the nature of collaboration in this time and the impact that it has had. And it's also an opportunity to thank everyone, because I want to echo what Faranaaz has said, which is, in this period, what we've seen is people really coming together to put all of our ideas into the pot, to find out where we can each spend our energies most efficiently and how we can enhance the impact of our collective work. And I think that this moment has really demonstrated the value of that approach. And I'm particularly grateful to comrades from Eco Education in Section 27. We've practically been 24/7 speaking to each other in this time and getting input from experts and others. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, everyone. And for those who were able to stay past the allocated time, I think that there are so many features of inequality and injustice that this webinar has highlighted. But what we've also heard is that we all need to recommit to work harder, to enhance the work of each other, and to recognize that this is the start of the conversation and that the conversation isn't over. Aslam Fatah has said in the chat group, can't we continue to work together in conversation to highlight what needs to be done and to give clarity about how the range of players in society, local government, NGO, teacher educators, can all, in conversation, find a way to move forward together. I think we have to thank Section 27, Equal Education Law Centre, and equal education for the work that they are doing that is so inspiring, so critical. And I thank the panelists on your behalf. I wish you were all live on air so that we could clap and say thank you, but you were great. The all-woman panel, as somebody pointed out.
Thanks so much to Section 27 for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracey.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Faranaaz.